Today on the podcast, we make fun of boomers. Sort of. Ted's here. Let's begin.
This is Debt Free in 30. Here's your host, Doug Hoyes.
Okay, Ted, welcome back. So, by the strict definition, I'm just a little too young to be a boomer.
Well, you are a baby, you know.
You, however, are not.
That's right. I'm the end of the boomers.
That's right. But you and I are both well over 60 years old, so it's not a stretch to say that, well, if we aren't boomers, we're certainly old, and therefore we are the targets of the scorn that we will be heaping on today's podcast.
Got it.
So since the beginning of time, you tell me if this is true or not.
Right.
Every generation, because I just put stuff in a script and I know
it's not AI?
AI does all of this, of course. We're not even real ourselves.
That's right.
Every generation has looked askance.
Ooh, how often do you use that word?
Never used that word on the podcast before. This is episode 563, first time I've used the word
askance. At the following
generations. Exactly, at the following generation. So, because we all say, well, in my day.
That's right. I used to get up 3 hours before I went to bed, walk 6 miles in the snow uphill both ways.
And 7 miles back and all the rest. Exactly. We say exactly that. So the implication is today's generation has it easier.
Got it.
And there is some truth to that. I mean, obviously, technology continues to improve.
I don't think they'd buy that argument.
Exactly. They would not buy that argument. So, what they would say is, well, yeah, okay, sure. I mean, yeah, we got the internet on our phones and all that kind of stuff, and we don't have to walk 7 miles both ways in the snow uphill.
Right.
But, take a look at the numbers. So let's do that. Let's take a look at the numbers. You, of course, are familiar with the Hoyes-Michaelis Joe Debtor bankruptcy study.
I am very familiar with that.
We release every year. So you get to read the first quote here. So I would like you to just read from the study, remind the listener what we found in our study.
Gotcha. So millennials, age 28 through 43, now make up half of all the insolvency filings, 50.1% in 2024. Their average unsecured debt climbed by 16.4% to $60,148 in 2024, while their credit card debt saw a staggering 35% increase, the largest increase of all cohorts.
Okay, that sounds kind of pretty bad there.
Ominous.
So if I'm a millennial, I'm saying, yeah, okay, boomer, like you just read it. We're half of the people who become insolvent, and our debt is going up, quite a bit. So there are a couple of possible interpretations for this. Maybe there's more. These are the two I came up with.
Okay.
So the boomers would say, well, yeah, you young people, you want it all. You don't realize the value of a dollar. You're too eager to use credit for your fancy vacations and your avocado toast and all that kind of stuff. So it's all your fault. You should work harder and spend less.
There you go.
Okay. Now, of course, the millennials will say, okay, boomer, you try living without debt with the cost of living today. So let's start with debt, shall we?
Okay.
Because this show is called Debt Free in 30.
Mm-hmm.
So you read the quote about, millennials' credit card debt increasing by 35%, and that was in 1 year.
That's right. And that's the largest we've ever seen in any group at any one time.
It just blows it away. So I'll put this chart up on the screen here, but you can kind of describe it. The older you are, the higher your credit card debt.
Right. And that makes sense to me, actually, because the older you are, presumably you've got more access to credit because you've had more time to accumulate either assets or, unfortunately, debt.
Exactly. The longer you're alive, if your debt increases a little bit each year.
It's kind of like your waistline.
Exactly.
The longer you're alive, the bigger it's going to get.
It is exactly like your waistline. So, if you were between the ages of 30 and 39, you had around $20,000 in credit card debt. But if you're over 60, you got $27,000.
Right.
Okay, so that kind of...
Of the people that came to see us.
Yes, and these are exactly the people who became insolvent. So I think you're absolutely right. It just continues to increase over time.
Right.
The real question is, why? So why is it that young people, easy for me to say, believe it's harder today, and older people think, wow, you should just work harder and don't have so much debt. So what's going on? What are the factors that explain this? So is it as simple as saying, wow, millennials, they just don't earn as much as what boomers used to earn?
Well, that's probably backwards. I suspect that millennials earn more at their age than the boomers did when they were the same age.
Yes.
In fact, significantly more.
Yeah, and that's actually true. And even if you adjust for inflation, obviously they earn more because of inflation and everything. And we did look at some actual stats, and I'm not going to go into the details of the numbers because, go look it up on the interweb if you want. Yeah, but if you take a look at, for example, the year 2016, millennials, so at that time, people in the 25 to 34 age group, had household after-tax income of around $44,000 compared to boomers who, at the same age in 1984, had an income of $33,000. And this is all inflation adjusted.
Right.
So
No, it's a third larger.
Yeah, and you can look at different ages and you kind of see the same thing. So what can possibly account for that? Why is it that millennials are earning more than boomers at the same age?
Well, I mean, it's like anything else. Even after you adjust for inflation, things tend to go up. And so if it's going to cost you more to live, you've got to earn more money. If you're going to earn more money, I can charge you more to live. And it just keeps...
It all kind of flows through.
Over time, yep.
And the other big difference is education. So millennials now...
They certainly pay for more education. Whether or not they're actually getting any more is a different conversation.
Well, but you think about it. You want an office job.
Right.
The minimum standard is you got to have a college or university degree.
Some kind of degree. Right?
So you got to have something.
To get a decent office job, now you need a master's.
Right, yeah. And we have lots of clients who are, working social work and things like that.
Yep.
And you got to have a master's.
Right.
And it's like you're making $2,700 a month and you have to have a master's? Like it's crazy.
Doesn't make any sense.
So I think the word for that is credential inflation.
Right. Credential creep.
Credential creep. That's an even better word for it. So, okay, yeah, I'm a millennial. I earn more than what my parents did at the same age, but I had to go to university for 4 years.
Right.
Whereas my parent perhaps didn't.
Well, and even if you did, your parent paid $2,000 for tuition and you're paying 12 or 15.
Yeah. So. So it's a two-way street, obviously. And I mean, I've said this many times on the podcast. When I went to university in the 1980s, before most of our viewers were born, I guess, at the University of Toronto, tuition was $1,000 a year.
Right.
And so even adjusting for inflation, you're right. It's way more. It's absolutely crazy. So, okay. So we've talked about, sort of the creep. We've talked about education. Are there any other reasons why millennials would earn more in constant dollars than what boomers would have earned?
Well, think back to when the boomers were just getting out of school and starting their careers in the 80s. It was a time of high inflation. It was a time of recession. And so when there's a recession, there's downward pressure on income. You earn less.
Yeah, and timing was huge. So if you graduated from university in 1987, as I believe I did, there were lots of jobs.
Right.
Every accounting firm, no problem. But if I had graduated a year or two earlier or a year or two later, totally different story, because that's just how the cycles go. And we all think back on the 80s, it was the greatest time ever.
It wasn't so great.
There were problems. And you're right. Recessions, inflation. And that was the whole start of the whole manufacturing decline.
Right.
So those jobs from the 50s where you could work in a factory and make really good money.
And if, we're going to make the world a better place to live, we're going to take all those jobs and push them offshore someplace.
Right. Well, and you're a car guy.
Yeah.
How many cars are made in Canada compared to what it looked like, in 1950 or 60 or 70 or 80?
We might actually be making more cars, but as a percentage of the cars we're using, it's significantly less.
Yeah, because there's more people and they're driving more.
Yep.
So, I don't know what the, Oshawa or Windsor looks like now compared to many years ago, but it's a lot less, I'm guessing.
That's right. I mean, they used to have 3 shifts working 24 hours a day in the 50s and 60s to satisfy demand. And now we keep hearing talks about Oshawa being shut down or the Ford plant in Oakville being shut down.
Yep. And it was 3 shifts of, many thousands of people, and now it's 1 shift of a few.
Somebody's got to keep the robots working.
Right, exactly. That's how it's all working. Okay, so we've kind of skirted around the main issue here.
Right.
If you talk to millennials, they're going to say, yeah, sure, we went to college, we got educated, so we have higher incomes, but of course, it costs more to live now.
Right.
And that's certainly true. You already mentioned about post-secondary education costing more.
Significantly.
That's a no-brainer. It's not our opinion.
And just housing and car costs, all those sorts of things.
Yeah, everything.
Right.
It's absolutely everything.
Except for toys. Toys are now less expensive
Toys are always
than
cheaper,
they used to
yes.
be.
You can play video games a much less obvious. So, and you're right, housing is clearly the biggest one.
Right.
30 or 40 or 50 years ago, a 20% down payment on a house might have taken 5 years to save up.
Yeah.
Today, it can literally take an infinite amount of time to save up.
Wow. So 20, 30, 40 years ago, you were trying to save $15,000 or $20,000.
Yes.
Now you need to save $250,000.
Yeah, exactly right.
How do you do it?
Yeah, $1 million house, a 20% down payment, that's $200,000. It's not hard. And I did some research. Okay, I went on the interweb. If your taxable income is $85,000 a year in Ontario, which is, okay, that's a good income, but you're not the top of the heap at that level.
Yep.
Your after-tax income, in other words, after you pay your taxes, is just over $68,000. The average rent for an apartment in Toronto is around $2,400 a month. And again, that's average. Yes, I know there are some that hire some average. Yep. So if you add in utilities, internet, transportation, and of course, we're talking about transit. We're not talking about having a car. If you live in Toronto, you can't afford a car. And food and other living expenses, it can easily cost $4,000 a month to live. That's $48,000 per year. So you've got at most 20 grand for savings. Right. 68 minus 48. And that's assuming you never go on vacation, never buy any new clothes, never go out for dinner, whatever.
Nothing ever breaks.
Nothing ever breaks, which is, of course, how the world works, right? The world is a perfect place. So if everything goes perfectly, it takes 10 years to save up a down payment. But it's worse than that because, of course, we ignored the title of the show and what the big expense for a lot of people is, which is debt. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And servicing that debt.
Well, and from our Joe Debtor study, and when I talk about debt, we're talking about millennials have student loan debt, credit cards, payday loans, tax debt. So after paying for debt, the amount of money they have is essentially zero. Right. There's nothing there. Yep. I think in our study, we calculated that for our average client, they've got like $288 a month for
available to service their debt, and our average client, unfortunately, needs about $2,500 to do it.
Yeah.
So it's a problem.
Yeah.
But assuming that you're not the average client, you're just the average person, still with $288 left to pay for debts. Even if you don't have any debts, that's all you can save.
Right, which is not possible to be saving up for
it's $3,200 a year.
Yeah, it's not possible. So yeah, debt is the problem. That's the big elephant in the room. And of course, the other elephant in the room is real estate.
Right.
So if you are a boomer, well, you are a boomer.
I am a boomer.
And so when did you buy your first house?
About 1991, I think.
So that was many years ago. And I think I bought my first one somewhere, 1989. Yeah. And that was a small townhouse, the whole bit.
Mine was 783 square feet. Yeah, 2-story.
And mine might have been 1,000 square feet. I'm not sure because it was a 2-story townhouse. And I remember very distinctly, I paid $205,000 for it. I thought I was a genius. And I sold it 7 years later for $20,000 less than I paid for it. So I lost 10% over 7 years.
Right, that was just bad timing.
Bad timing. However, if I had bought the house 5 years later, or if I had kept it for 20 years, it's now worth, I don't know, $800,000 or whatever the number is. So the reason I mention that is because it's not whether you're a millennial or a boomer. That's not the key distinction. It's do you have assets?
Right.
Because whatever asset you had, it is worth more. That's because of how inflation works and everything else.
It's just everything goes up.
Everything goes up. So you take that boomer who bought a house 30 years ago and, hopefully they've paid off the mortgage and they're sitting on a house worth $1 million.
Right.
And that same person, a millennial or somebody younger than that, they never do get the opportunity to buy the house.
Right. Because they're starting at the $1 million. And if they can buy it in 30 years from now, it'll be worth $3 million. But how the hell do you get the first million?
You can't. And 30 years from now, who knows? Maybe it will have completely crashed. So it's not your age that makes you better or worse off. It's whether or not you have assets. If you bought stocks 20 years ago, real estate 20 years ago, in your case, all the crypto you bought, 5 or 10 years ago has made you a multi-billionaire. And of course, you already just kind of hinted at it. It's not just that you got to pay $1 million for a house. You're starting off with debt.
Right.
Because if you're 30 years old, how did you go to university?
Student loans.
Yeah, unless your parents paid for it, you're kind of pooched. So now we don't talk about politics on the show because
we don't ever do. No,
I believe the vast majority of politicians from all political parties are evil. But the results of the federal election in May 2025 proved this point. Boomers are doing great. So they overwhelmingly voted for the old man with gray hair who would continue the same policies.
Right, who would look after them.
And people under the age of 45 overwhelmingly voted for the other guy who said he would change things.
Right.
Now, I think they're all basically the same, and it doesn't matter who you vote for. They're all going to do exactly the same thing. So I'm not talking about reality here. I'm talking about perception. And just, fun fact here. It's true the Prime Minister is an old man with gray hair.
That's true.
I'm actually older than him.
Right, and you have grayer hair.
And I have gray hair. But I color mine, and we have fancy lighting here in the studio.
And do you want to be Prime Minister?
I do not.
We can't afford the pay cut.
No, I definitely could not, and I couldn't afford it. But yeah, it's amazing. He's actually younger than I am. So here's the point. Times are different than in the past, so different generations have different attitudes towards debt.
Right.
And we're going to get into the practical advice section in a minute, but just, for sake of completeness, and you tell me if you agree with this or not, boomers often view debt as something you use for major planned purchases.
Sure.
A house, a car.
Yeah. For boomers, debt has traditionally been a tool to allow you to do a specific thing. There's a very specific need. It's not that you have a whole bunch of credit cards and then you just spend because you have to spend. It's, I want to do this, and so I will finance it that way.
And contrast that then with somebody who isn't a boomer.
Well, so after the boomers came the what?
Well, I don't know. You had the whatevers and the... Let's just say people who are, 25, 35, 45 years old.
Right. So the folks that, one, don't have the same attitude towards cash as the boomers might have.
Because we don't use it anymore.
Right. Cash is gone. All we have is this little plastic thing, and it just doesn't feel the same when you're charging something on plastic. You don't recognize it. Okay, my asset base is now diminished by whatever it is I just spent. Or my debt level has increased by whatever I just spent. And so the attitude towards spending is different inherently. You don't think of it. Can I afford the payment? Bang, I make the purchase.
Well, in fact, now you can use your phone to make payments.
That's true too.
There's a thing, you just do it and it somehow takes it from the world, and I don't know how it works, but
until you lose your phone.
I know, then you're totally pooched. So yeah, I think you're right that a younger person, number one, we've already talked about all the pressures that are on them. I can't afford to live. Wow. So I'm more likely to be using debt to survive.
But as soon as you finish high school, if you go on to post-secondary or any kind of trades or anything, you immediately accumulate debt to get those credentials that we were talking about. So your relationship with debt is completely different than the relationship I would have had with debt 40 years ago.
Because I've always had it.
Right. You always had it. You've never known any time that you didn't have it. It's just a fact of life that you're going to have to pay people interest to get ahead.
Yeah, it's kind of like a 2-year-old kid knows how to work the tablet.
Right.
Now, I don't know, your kids are not 2 years old, but I don't know.
They're all teenagers.
They're all teenagers. Did they grow up with tablets as young people and always knew how to use them? Because, when you and I first saw frankly, when we first saw a computer,
right,
we were, I don't want to break it. Mm-hmm. Whereas I know...
I started out with punch cards.
Well, so did I.
COBOL and Watt 4.
I remember in high school, we had the pencils to fill in the dots or something.
Right.
But whereas my kids who are now in their, mid to later 20s, they were never afraid of a computer.
Right.
And if it broke, well, we would just fix it.
Right. Or pitch it and get another one.
Yeah. Like and when I say break, I don't mean physically break it. I mean, we recoded it and we wiped the hard drive. Well, I guess we'll reinstall it or something.
Right.
So the whole
attitude.
Yeah, the whole attitude is different. And it's, they live in a much more electronic world than we ever did. So I think that's part of it. So I guess the attitude is kind of shifted from, debt is, it's something, I don't really want it. It's a necessary evil, as opposed to, no, I've started, just like I started out with a computer at the age of 2, I started out with a student loan at the age of 18. It's the natural state.
Yeah. If you've always had it, then you don't know not having it.
It's not a big thing. And then, of course, we already talked about the cost of living, how it's changed. The job market has changed. I mean, in the 1980s, your entry-level job probably included a pension, probably had benefits, probably had some kind of job security.
My first full-time job, the salary was $11,000 a year.
Right. But
and I was 80 something.
But yeah, what was my first salary was $20,000 a year, because I'm much younger than you, obviously.
Well, and yours was in accounting.
Yes, it was. That was, I'm not talking about my first job. That was my first full-time job at a university.
Right.
But back then, okay, $20,000, it wasn't massive amount of money, but you could actually live on it. So now, of course, it's very common to be doing gig work. Mm-hmm. We never had gig work.
The concept didn't make any sense.
It was not a thing. You got a job and you stayed with the employer for a relatively long time. So median wage growth has not kept pace with the cost of living. It just hasn't. And then you already talked about the whole post-secondary thing. Average university tuition used to be $1,000. Now very common for it to be $10,000 or $15,000.
Right.
And we're talking about 1 year. So as a result, higher tuition, higher student loans, and so on. And then I don't know if we need to go into any detail on it or not, but interest rates are a bit different.
Well, nobody properly understands interest rates because nobody teaches them that. I mean, the thing you should be most interested in is interest rates. How much does it cost you to use somebody else's money? How much are they willing to pay you to use your money? That's what's driving this whole thing.
Yeah, an interest rate is the cost of using money.
Right.
It's as simple as that. And so in the 1980s, early 1990s, interest rates were very high.
Yeah, in 1981, I think my first new car loan was at 21%.
Yeah, and I believe my first mortgage was at 13 and a quarter.
Yeah, just insane.
And, well, it was insane, but I paid $200,000 for the property.
Right.
So the payment, I can't do math in my head, but 13% on a $200,000 is how much different is that than, 5% on $1 million?
Well, it's $26,000 a year when your salary was $20,000.
Yeah. So obviously I didn't have a mortgage for 100% of it, but
obviously.
But yes, it was a stupid move back then.
Well, not necessarily stupid. It was just a different reality, and it terrified people. I mean, the recession in the early 80s was a real eye-opener for a lot of folks, particularly the end of the boomers who weren't expecting that kind of thing. And we should have been.
Yeah.
It's cyclical. It happens all the time.
Yeah, I don't think I bought the house until 2 years after. So I think my pay was probably more like $40,000 there or something.
And you had some money in the bank.
So I could almost afford it.
You sold your kidneys.
I did. I've only got none left. So yeah, a totally different story. And I think interest rates are a result of the money supply, and we print a lot more money, and we're not going to go into that on this show here. But yeah, things are certainly different. And so as a result, you got to result to side hustles, online income streams, remote work. Credit's a little bit, well, it's a lot easier to get.
And a lot more of it's available.
Yeah. And more types of it.
Right.
So it's not just I go to the bank and get a loan.
Wow. It's like anything else. It's, the longer something's been around, the more different flavors you can get. Used to be there was just vanilla ice cream, then there was chocolate, then there were 31 flavors, and now the 31 flavors people probably have 200 flavors. They just cycle them through.
Yeah, that's probably true.
Whatever you want, you can find.
Well, and look at all the different flavors of credit. So we've always had bank loans, we've always had mortgages, we've always had car loans. But now we've got your favorite, which I'm not going to mention.
Right, let's not mention them.
We won't mention that word. But then we've got the buy now, pay later stuff too.
Yep.
So, which is a totally new thing over the last number of years. I mean, it certainly wasn't there 10 years ago, 15 years ago. But I can go buy a pair of shoes and
it's an old thing that's come back, only differently.
Yeah.
So it used to be you could order whatever you want from Sears. Mm-hmm. You'd pay them for 2 years, and once it was paid in full, they'd ship you the shoes.
Right.
They ship you the shoes, and you pay them for the next 2 years.
Yeah. Well, and your typical buy now, pay later deal is, okay, you're going to pay, a third over a 6-week period or something like that. So it's, $120, you split it up. And okay, there's no interest on it if you pay it. It's a way for the store to make more sales.
It's somewhere you're paying for.
Well, the cost of the goods are obviously buried in that price. The issue with that, of course, is I can now buy 2 pairs of shoes then because it's going to cost me the same cash outlay at the start. Right. And that's how it all kind of
And
spiraled.
we all need the 2 pairs of shoes.
We do. We all need
17 or whatever.
We all need shoes. So, okay, so let's flip over to practical advice here.
What was the topic of today's show?
The topic of today's show is basically the difference in the debt gap between younger people and older people. Right. So I'm of the view that, and the reason I wanted to do this show is we all live in our own bubble. Sure. So, taking it one step further, we all create our own reality.
No one is as interested in your affairs as you are.
Yes. And so if I'm a 60-year-old guy who bought a house 40 years ago and I'm sitting on a pile of wealth and equity, it's like, well, I did it.
Right, can't you?
And I did it through hard work and spit and polish.
And I was earning so much less and working longer hours, and I got it done.
And of course, the answer was, well, no, you grew up in a completely different time when the world was different. Mm-hmm. And for somebody who's younger, it's like, well, again, it's their own perspective on it is there is no way I can ever escape this. Right. Which may actually be true in a lot of cases. Mm-hmm. So I think we got to understand where the other person is coming from because your situation is not the same as whatever everybody else has. So let's try to put a positive spin on this.
Okay.
Because what I just said was there was no hope, which that's kind of not a great way to. So my first question for you: what can younger people learn from old men like you, if anything? Is there anything they can learn?
Well, the reality is to accumulate wealth, to accumulate assets, that means at some point you've got to spend less money than you're earning. because unless someone's going to give it to you, and there is a wealth transfer when your parents die and all that sort of stuff, the only way to get ahead is to deliberately spend less than you're earning. You've got to be able to save some money to make that next step.
And how is that possible when my paycheck is this much and rent is this much? Like what?
Right. It's more and more difficult for more and more people, particularly because mass marketing, media, advertising is all convincing you need stuff that maybe you don't need. Mm-hmm. Right. I think there's a move afoot now to get away from smartphones for the younger generations because they realize how much money they're spending on servicing them every month. I don't know if that's going to last because people can't live without their phones, but it's just an example. You've been told you got to have this thing to make your life perfect, and maybe you don't need that thing.
Yeah, but if I was to push back on that, I would say, okay, so you're saying you don't need a place to live? Like,
yeah, you got to live someplace.
You got to eat. Mm-hmm. So, okay, I agree. If it's at all possible, don't have a car because cars are very expensive.
And I'd rather have a car than someplace to live. But that's
right. You'd sleep in the back seat if you could. Right. So I think, it is difficult. Like,
set priorities. What suits you? What do you need for you to survive? And then you build from there.
Yep. And so that likely means if you're a young person, okay, well, you've got a roommate or four.
Right.
You know, you're taking the transit. You don't have a car. You're, cooking your own food as opposed to going out, whatever it takes.
Right.
And you hit the nail on the head there. I forget what you said, but it was something along the lines of you've got to spend less than you make. And the reason for that is so that you got $1 in the bank at the end of the month.
Right.
And it's that $1 that grows into 2, 10, 12, and
sure.
goes from there.
And so, it's a different conversation. The first conversation is you got to be able to save something. And then you need to have the conversation with, okay, how do you get that savings to multiply? Mm-hmm. This isn't the savings to multiply show. It's the Debt Free in 30 show. We want you to save.
Right.
And then we'll flash off to somebody else to do the next part.
Exactly. Which is where all your crypto comes in.
My crypto.
So it's a joke, people. He doesn't know what that means. So the answer is you got to get that first $1.
Right.
Now, okay, I got a follow-up question to that, which is, what if I got debt? How do I get the first $1? But before we hit that one, flip it around. So you said what we can learn from boomers. Okay, so what can older people learn from younger people then?
What can older people learn from younger people? Everything is relative. So something that looks good to you may not look good to them. And so the boomers, we're all afraid of debt. We're debt averse. We're afraid of risks in any kind of way. The younger folks are living in a whole different dynamic. So
yeah, I agree. They have been forced to be much more adaptable, much more resourceful. Yeah. And okay, maybe that's something we can learn from them too, that they've kind of had no choice. They got to get that second job. Right. They got to do the side hustle. The side hustle may be a form of, self-employment or something.
It's just some way to generate more income.
Yeah. And so you kind of got to admire them. Mm-hmm. I've got lots of clients, I'm sure you do too, who are working 2 jobs.
Yep.
Because they got no choice.
Yeah, or they're working into retirement.
Right. And which, is not a bad thing. Mm-hmm. And so, okay, as an older person, you kind of got to look at them and go, yeah, they're hustling. I thought I worked pretty hard.
They're doing what they got to do.
They're doing what they got to do. And that's not a bad thing. So, okay, so we're pretty much out of time. So I'm going to close with this. As I said, we all live in our own bubble. Old people get their news from the TV. They get the right. CNN going full
That's
time. The
insult for the kids, right?
Exactly.
Why don't you go watch TV?
Yeah. Ooh, no, I'm not going to do that.
How's that insult?
Younger people get it from online, non-traditional sources, mm-hmm. whatever. So we see the world differently. So my hope today is that we kind of look at what the other side is seeing and kind of go, okay, maybe there's another way to look at it. I think boomers should be more sympathetic to the plight of younger people who had to pay a lot more for their education, faced with a job market that frankly sucks a lot.
Right.
And, they're starting off with high
boomers are now
debt.
becoming grandparents, and grandparents always treat their grandchildren better than they treat their children. So.
I look forward to that day when I can do the same thing. And I think younger people have to realize that the pendulum's swinging. The old people won't be running the world forever.
Right.
They're still running it now, but we're not going to be running it ever. I mean, you said there might be a wealth transfer, but certainly at some point it will be the millennials who are in the positions of power.
It's your turn.
It's your turn.
You can make your own mistakes.
You can screw it up just like the boomers have done. So right. I think, learn how money works, keep pushing forward. That's about all you can do. And if you do have too much debt, which is a problem at all ages,
Right.
well, give us a call. We can walk you through the different options there. So that is our thoughts. You got any final thoughts on any of that?
Say it almost every episode. The only one interested in your finances is you. You're the most interested person in your life. Pay attention to what you're doing.
I agree. Don't worry about what everyone else is doing. They've all got a different life. Control what you can control and take it from there.
Right.
Excellent. That is our show for today. Please like, subscribe, notify. You know all the whole routines. We'll put it up on the screen. Show notes will include links to everything we talked about. Thanks for listening. Until next week, I'm Doug Hoyes. That was Debt Free in 30.
As well.